So we are back out in the Peugeotator. I've actually come out while we're away in Yorkshire to try and find some car parts. So I have a lesson learned for you. If you order car parts after midnight and it says collect tomorrow, it doesn't mean tomorrow to you, it means tomorrow to the time after midnight. So I went online Thursday night, ordered some parts for collection tomorrow, and they're not available till Saturday. So now I'm driving all the way back from said car parts supplier with what is an ever increasingly poorly sounding Peugeot. So I mentioned about there being a bit of a knock from the engine. We weren't entirely sure what it was. Thought it might be an engine mount. I think there is an engine mount, but I think there is also the dreaded death rattle, which is quite an easy fix. But if it does fail on me, it could be quite catastrophic. So the bottom pulley on the crankshaft, which runs the auxiliary belt, has a harmonic balancer in it. The little rubber bit inside that provides the balancing has worn out and is increasingly getting worse. In fact, it's making a hideous noise right now. And that just basically needs replacing. So it's a case of untensioning the belt, whip the belt off, take the pulley off the end of the crankshaft, new pulley back on, and away you go. So we've ordered the part, but it's not here today. It will be here tomorrow. And while I was at it, at the car parts shop, I was able to locate one of the engine mounts I want to change, which is the dog bone mount at the bottom. At the back is partly attached to the gearbox. Wow, that car sounded worse than this. And so that's been ordered as well for collection tomorrow. So hopefully 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, back up to the parts shop, get the parts, get the car repaired so it's good for the drive home. It's good that we've done this long test run on the car. It means that when I hand this over to its new owner next week, it is going to be in fine fettle. It would be a bit rubbish of me to have handed over a car for it only have broken down about a week later. So at least I will have a clean conscience and the car will be hopefully good for another 20, 30, 40,000 miles, who knows. Right, let's get back to driving. So all the noise appears to be coming from this auxiliary belt. So it runs from the main pulley on the engine. It comes over the tensioner, which is this device here, up over the alternator, down to the AC pump, and then back. Now everything feels fine on here, but the noise is definitely coming from deep in there. Annoyingly, I've tried to capture it on the video, now it doesn't want to make the noise. But there's a definite thunking noise, quite a loud kind of metal type clunking noise, but it's quite irregular. Which definitely points to the harmonic balancer on that bottom pulley on this system. So to get to it, the first thing to do is take its belt off, which is released with the tensioner here, similar to the Volvo and other things we've done. In this case, you put a 15mm open-ended spanner across the two flats here, which allows you to pull on this and release the tension on the belt, and then you can whip the belt out and we can start having a look at that pulley. So the belt is off. Looks like we're going to need to replace that at some point before the car goes, because it's pretty knackered. So you can see I've used this random swivel socket thing just because it happened to be handy, and that's now wedged on the tensioner so that the tensioner doesn't ping back out of the way and not be able to get to it. So that's holding the tensioner in place. You see the belt is off. We spun around everything. It's very clearly the bottom end pulley. And after a massive fight with the wheel, it seems to be a thing with French cars from this period, because everyone I've worked on, getting the wheels back off is a nightmare. But the wheel is now off, and you can just see through there to the bottom pulley. So that's an 18mm bolt on there we need to get off. So I need to get an adapter to put it on the impact gun, see if we can get it off without to lock the engine up. But you can see just round between the two halves of it how really perished that rubber is. That really is knackered. So new one should arrive tomorrow and can go back on. So I'm going to try and get it off tonight, and then first thing in the morning, whack the new one on. So I have been back to the parts supplier, and I now finally have my nice new pulley. And I managed to get the old one off with the application of an impact gun. I tried using a breaker bar, but all it was doing was turning the engine over. Even in gear, it just turns the brake disc because the wheel is off. You can see the damage on this one. That little rubber bushing between the two halves of the pulley is knackered. I also didn't notice yesterday how bad this belt was. So you can see, I mean, that's like got a third left at best, and it's all peeling away. So while I was out, I also got myself a new belt, because there's no way that is going to last me the 100 miles back home. So now it's just a case of pop this back on, screw it in, tighten it up to some duggers, belt back on, release the tensioner, and fingers crossed, that should be the end of the death rattle. The pulley is back on, the belt is back on, and the tension is released. So you can see the little 15mm bit here now is it's back where it should be. So it's the moment of truth. Time to start it up and see what goes pop or not. Right, here goes. All making a noise. Well, that's annoying. Having thought we had solved the problem with the bottom pulley, we are back to square one. So out with the all-important screwdriver to try and locate the source of the noise. Initial conclusion? Probably the tensioner. It seems like the most obvious choice at this point. Having had the belt off, the alternator and the aircon pump both felt nice and fine. Smooth bearings, no noises. And surely a piece of rotating machinery wouldn't cause such a strange knocking noise. There has to be the tension, right? So, day 369 of fixing this bloody Peugeot. I've managed to replace the engine mount, which, as you can see, was not particularly well. And I started to address the problem of this not solving the problem of the horrible rattling noise. So, we've come to the conclusion. I took the belt back off, ran the engine without the alternator and AC pump on, and it was quiet as anything. So the only thing it can be is the tensioner. So we have taken the tension off, which was nearly impossible, because in the great wisdom of Peugeot design, the bolt here doesn't actually come out, because when there's no tension on the tensioner, it hits the other half of the tensioner, so that bolt is completely stuck. So that's probably a vice job to get him out. And then I need to order a new tensioner, which it's a Sunday, and the only one available is in Leeds, which is about an hour's drive away. So it looks like it might be another day on this Peugeot to wait for parts and reassemble, and hopefully it's good to go. Ta-da! New part is fitted with the new belt. Now, it was not quite that simple, so I have a few top tips. Taking this out is really difficult. 3 10mm bolts, you can just about make the final one there in my fingertip, and then the 2 on the top here. They are very, very tricky to get to. For the final one, it's worth going up from underneath in the wheel arch to get at it. The problem you've got is when there's no tension on this tensioner, this little lip here, this bit sticks out here, is designed to allow you to untension the belt. So you slot a 15mm spanner, I don't know if you can see that, over that piece there, and that allows you to adjust the tension on the tensioner. Now when there's no belt on and the tensioner is off, that piece obstructs this bolt, which is a great piece of design. The new ones come with a pin which holds the tension on, so you can fit the piece already tensioned and well out of the way of the bolts. But once you've got the old one off, the only way to retrieve your third and final bolt is, as you can see here, I had to actually snap that little adjuster piece off to release this bolt from its grave. So unfortunately the new one didn't come with new bolts, so we had to reuse those. New one is on, so now we're going to try for the first time and see if we finally got rid of that bloody clattering. Right then, Mr. Peugeonator, check we're in neutral. Let's see if we've fixed you. Please, please, please. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. possibly be making this bloody noise? Right, that's it. Sod it. I'm driving it home like that. Something goes bang, it goes bang. So, with that utter failure, there was only one suspect left. We'd ruled out the AC pump, we'd replaced the bottom pulley and replaced the tensioner, which leaves the alternator. So while I had the belt off, I had been playing with the pulley on the alternator and it felt very smooth and rotated nicely, no grumbling noises at all. However, there is a clutch inside the pulley of the alternator. I'm not entirely sure how that works and exactly what its purpose is, but at some point it is able to disconnect the alternator from the belt drive. As a result, I can only assume that is what has failed. The symptoms are when the engine is first started and it's cold and it's idling, you get this terrible knocking noise. Now as soon as you add revs, or once the engine is warm, the noise goes away almost completely. My suspicion is when you first start the car, you're using a lot of charge from the battery and the alternator is then desperately trying to recharge that battery back up to compensate for the starting action. As a result, it's putting a lot of load on the battery and that clutch is failing and not able to transmit the torque into the alternator. Once the revs rise, then the extra RPM means there's less force required on that clutch, which would stand to reason. So with that information, there was one last thing I needed to do, which was wing it. Fed up of being stuck away from home, I decided to put the belt back on again and drive it, see where we get to. At least if the tensioner fails, it could do a lot of damage. The bottom pulley fails, it could do a lot of damage. If the clutch fails on the alternator, well, it's unlikely to do a massive amount of damage. I'd like to think I'm going to hear it if it starts to fail properly and have enough time to bail over to the side of the road or into the services, take the tension off the belt, because I can do that with the tools I've got in the boot, and then I can drive along without the alternator attached to the belt drive at all. So that's my backstop to get me home. Then when I get home, it's time to order an alternator, and if that doesn't fix it, well, I might just torch this goddamn thing, so I'm getting a little bit fed up with it. But it has to be something on that belt drive, so it can only be the alternator. Famous last words. As you can hear, after a long drive, not a noise at all. So we've been driving on the motorway and a little bit of hard driving off the motorway. So the alternator has probably topped the battery up nice and full. And as a result, it's not really making any noise at all. Which I think for me confirms it's the alternator. Now I've stopped at home, I'm going to do a little trial. At the moment the car is running nice and quiet. Put it over here. Now if I turn on my side lights, okay. Turn on the dip beam and we've got a rattle. Turn on high beam and it's rattling a little more. Let's turn on a few more things. Let's have the hazards on, let's have everything else on. We've got heaters on, let's turn the AC on. And there it's going absolutely nuts. So I think we've discovered it's the alternator after all. After all that work. Right, home James, don't spare the horses.